It was my birthday dinner. My new boyfriend sat across from me, trying to be polite. My mother kept finding excuses to lean toward him, touching his shoulder, asking him personal questions with her hand on his arm. He kept glancing at me, uncomfortable. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to stop on her own. She needed to be caught. She needed a mirror. Looking back, I realized this didn't start when I got my first boyfriend. It started years earlier, when I was just a kid watching my mother's behavior with other men. My father's friends, the neighbor, even the mailman. She'd always touch their arms when she laughed. She'd tilt her head and look up at them like they were the most interesting person alive. My dad would notice, I'd notice, but nobody said anything. I remember being maybe 12, sitting in our kitchen while my parents argued about a dinner party. My mom had spent the whole evening talking to my dad's colleague, laughing extra loud, standing too close. My dad called her out. She got angry. "You're so insecure," she snapped. "I was just being nice." But there was something in her eyes, a satisfied glint, like she enjoyed making my dad uncomfortable. That's when I understood. This was a game to her. By the time I was a teenager, I started noticing something else. Whenever I got attention, good grades, a school award, even just my friends saying I was fun, she'd find a way to pull focus back to herself. If my friends came over, she'd suddenly be the center of attention. She'd dress differently, laugh louder, position herself as the cool, young-looking mom. My friends thought she was amazing. I felt invisible. And then there was the compliment trap. If I talked about a boy at school, she'd ask excessive questions. What does he look like? Is he tall? Is he smart? At first, I thought she was being interested. But later, I'd run into her accidentally at the mall near his neighborhood. Or she'd mention him casually to my friends. It felt like she was collecting information to compete with me, not support me. I never put it together until that birthday dinner. Watching her hand my boyfriend a drink, watching his discomfort, I realized this wasn't new behavior she was developing. This was the same pattern I'd watched my entire life. The same game she played with my father, with his friends, with strangers. But now she was playing it with the men I loved. And somehow, that made it hit different. That's when I knew this was deliberate. This was personal. I met Derek in college. He was kind, steady, the kind of guy who made me feel safe. The first time I brought him home for dinner, I was nervous but hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe I was just being paranoid about my mother. Halfway through the meal, she excused herself to change into something more comfortable, a tight black top that she definitely didn't need to change into. When she came back, she leaned against the counter near Derek, asking him about his job, his family, his dreams. Nothing inherently wrong, but her hand kept finding reasons to touch his arm. "Oh, that's so interesting," she'd say, squeezing his sleeve. Derek would shift uncomfortably. I'd feel my chest tighten. After he left, I brought it up. "Mom, did you notice how you were touching him?" She laughed. "I was just being friendly." "Why are you always so suspicious?" "Derek probably thinks you're paranoid now." That word, paranoid, lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. The next boyfriend was Marcus. Same pattern, different details. This time, my mother found out he loved jazz. Suddenly, she was an expert on jazz too, leaning across the dinner table to discuss artists with him while barely acknowledging I was there. She'd angle her body toward him, laugh at his jokes with this performative intensity. When I expressed concern, she said, "I'm trying to get to know your boyfriend. Isn't that what a good mother does?" I started doubting myself. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe normal mothers just acted this way around their daughters' boyfriends. But then came David. And David was the one who broke my denial wide open. We'd been together for 8 months. I loved him. On Thanksgiving, my mother wore a dress that was far too revealing for a family dinner. She spent the entire evening monopolizing his attention, asking him about his ex-girlfriends with this curious, almost flirtatious tone. David looked trapped. I felt sick. Later that night, alone in my room, I cried. Not just cried, sobbed. The kind of crying where you can't catch your breath, where your whole body shakes. David knocked on my door, confused. "What's wrong? Your mom is nice." "She's flirting with you," I whispered. "What? No, she's just talking to me." "You don't see it because it's not directed at you the way it is for me. You don't feel invisible. You don't feel like your own mother is trying to steal your boyfriend." He thought I was crazy. He actually thought I was jealous of my own mother. And in that moment, sitting on my bed with my boyfriend looking at me like I was unstable, I felt something shift inside me. Not doubt anymore. Certainty. Cold, clear certainty. This wasn't in my head. This was real. And nobody, not my boyfriends, not my mother, not anyone, was going to validate it for me. I had to prove it myself. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I was at work when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Tell David I said hello. He's such a catch. You're lucky to have him." Something inside me snapped. Not in an angry way, in a clear, cold way. Like someone had finally turned on a light in a dark room and I could suddenly see everything. She was texting my boyfriend, behind my back, after I'd already expressed how uncomfortable her behavior made me. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she was doing it anyway. I sat at my desk for 20 minutes, staring at that text. My hands were shaking. I couldn't focus on work. All I could think was, she's never going to stop, and nobody will ever believe me unless I show them. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went through my phone and compiled evidence. Screenshots of moments when she'd touched boyfriends inappropriately. A video I'd taken at a dinner where she was clearly angling her body toward Marcus. I played the video back 3 times, watching my mother's face, her deliberate movements, her calculated smile. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't just being friendly. This was calculated, intentional behavior designed to make me feel small. But evidence wasn't enough anymore. I needed witnesses. I needed someone to see it in real time and be unable to deny it. I needed my mother to finally be caught red-handed. That's when the idea came to me. It started as a dark joke in my head. What if I hired someone to be my boyfriend? What if I set a trap? I actually laughed out loud, sitting alone in my apartment. It felt insane, manipulative, exactly the kind of thing my mother would do. And then I stopped laughing. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have another choice. David had already made up his mind that I was overreacting. My mother had already gaslit me into silence. My family had already chosen to ignore what was happening. I was completely alone in this. I spent the next week in a state of quiet panic. I'd lie awake at night thinking about it. Was I becoming her? Was I about to do something manipulative and cruel? The guilt sat in my stomach like a stone, but then I'd remember that text. You're lucky to have him. The possessiveness, the calculation, the absolute refusal to respect my boundaries. No, I wasn't becoming her. I was defending myself against her. By Friday, I'd made a decision. I was going to do it. I was going to hire an actor, create a fake boyfriend scenario, and finally, prove that my mother's behavior was real, deliberate, and completely unacceptable. I just didn't know how far she would actually go. Finding an actor turned out to be easier than I expected. There's a whole website for people who rent themselves out for various events, weddings, fake dates, family gatherings. I scrolled through profiles like I was shopping for a couch, which felt surreal. I found someone named James. Early 30s, handsome in a non-threatening way, good reviews. The bio said he specialized in family situation management. Perfect. I booked a consultation call. My hands were sweating the entire time. I told him exactly what I needed. Play my boyfriend for one family dinner, act genuinely uncomfortable if my mother made physical contact or inappropriate comments, and help me document her behavior. He didn't even hesitate. I've done this before, he said. Family dynamics are complicated. I can help. Hearing someone else say it was real, that family dynamics could be this complicated, made me cry quietly after we hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, we planned everything. I gave James detailed background, what to say about his job, his family, how we met. I told him about my mother's patterns, her triggers, the exact way she leaned in and touched. He took notes like he was preparing for a real role, because, in a way, he was. The guilt never stopped. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning thinking, what if she notices? What if this backfires? What if I'm the villain in this story? I'd replay my mother's face in my mind, wondering if she'd be humiliated, hurt, angry, and then I'd remember that text, "You're lucky to have him," and the guilt would quiet down. I told David I wanted to do a family dinner soon. He seemed relieved. Maybe he thought things were normalizing. I didn't tell him the truth. I couldn't. He already thought I was paranoid. The night before James was supposed to come, I sat in my apartment in complete silence. No music, no phone scrolling, just silence. I was about to blow up my entire family dynamic on the gamble that my mother would behave exactly as she always did. What if she didn't? What if this whole thing was in my head, and I was about to humiliate myself and hurt my mother for nothing? But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what she was going to do. The question wasn't whether she'd do it. The question was, what would happen when everyone finally saw it too? I introduced James to my mother on a Saturday evening. We were at an Italian restaurant, neutral ground, public space, witnesses around us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My mother walked in wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Red, fitted, too much for a casual family dinner. When she saw James, something shifted in her face. Her eyes lit up in a way they never did when she looked at me. That satisfied glint, that hunger. "Oh, he's so handsome," she said, air kissing his cheek and letting her hand linger on his shoulder. "How did my daughter manage to snag someone like you?" James smiled politely. "She's pretty amazing." But my mother wasn't listening. She'd already moved past that. She slid into the booth next to him instead of across from him. My stomach dropped. In 3 years of boyfriends, she'd never sat next to one. This was new. This was escalation. "Tell me everything about yourself," she said, tilting her head in that way she always did. "I want to know who's stealing my daughter away from me." The word stealing hung in the air. It was possessive. Intimate. Wrong. James glanced at me, and I nodded slightly. "Go ahead." Throughout dinner, my mother touched his arm constantly. She laughed at everything he said, even the things that weren't jokes. She asked him personal questions with this intense curiosity. "Are you close with your mother? Do you like strong women? What's your type?" Each question was flirtation disguised as interest. I watched my mother's face. I watched the way she angled her body, the way her laugh became performative, the way she found excuses to lean closer. This wasn't motherly interest. This was seduction. Clear, unmistakable seduction of my boyfriend. And then it happened. My mother reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind James's ear. Not a casual touch. A tender, intimate gesture. Her fingers lingered on his cheek for just a moment too long. I felt my chest cave in. Tears burned my eyes. James immediately pulled back. "Oh, He looked uncomfortable, which was exactly what we'd planned, but seeing it in real life, seeing my mother's behavior reflected on his face, made it undeniable. "What?" My mother laughed. "I'm just being friendly." "That's not friendly," I said quietly. My mother's face hardened. "Don't be ridiculous. You just touched his face. You've been flirting with him all night. You wore that dress for him. You're doing exactly what you've always done." "I'm doing nothing of the sort. You're being paranoid and dramatic, as usual." "You're embarrassing yourself in front of your boyfriend?" But James spoke up. "No, actually she's right. You've been making me uncomfortable all night. It's not appropriate." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's face turned red. She looked between James and me, and I saw it. The moment she realized she'd been caught. Not by me, by a stranger, by proof. "Well," she said coldly, standing up, "I think this dinner is over." My mother left the restaurant without paying for her meal. I sat there with James, both of us in shock, while the waiter awkwardly asked if we wanted dessert. I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my water glass. James excused himself to the bathroom. When he came back, he just said, "I'm sorry that happened, but you were right." He left shortly after, and I sat alone at the table, feeling completely hollow. My phone started ringing the next morning. My mother had called my father, told him some version of what happened. By afternoon, my father was calling me angry. "Your mother is devastated. Why would you set her up like that? Why would you humiliate her in public? Not, did she actually do those things? Not, are you okay? Just, how could you hurt her?" I tried explaining. I told him about the pattern, the years of behavior, the gaslighting. He listened quietly, and then he said something that broke something inside me. "Your mother has a lot of insecurity. She's always been like this. You should have just accepted it instead of trying to expose her." Accept it? Like my mother's need to seduce my boyfriends was just something I had to tolerate. Like my boundaries didn't matter. Like I was supposed to protect her feelings while she systematically disrespected mine. My mother, meanwhile, went into victim mode. She called relatives, she cried to her friends. The narrative became, "My daughter is cruel and ungrateful," and tried to trick me in public. Nobody mentioned the actual behavior. Nobody talked about what she'd done. They just talked about what I'd done. I felt vindicated and destroyed at the same time. Part of me wanted to scream, "See? I told you. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. She was doing it on purpose." But another part of me, a part I hated, felt guilty. I'd manipulated her, even if it was to prove a point. I'd set a trap. I'd involved a stranger in my family dysfunction. Was I becoming her? The answer came slowly, over weeks. No, I wasn't becoming her, because I did it once, to prove a point that everyone had denied. She did it repeatedly, deliberately, without remorse. She did it knowing it hurt me, and when caught, she played victim instead of taking responsibility. That was the difference. But the cost was high. My mother barely spoke to me for months. My father took her side. Extended family thought I was cruel. David eventually broke up with me, saying the whole situation was too much drama. I lost relationships trying to protect my own boundaries. And somehow, even with proof, even with validation, it still didn't feel like enough. It's been 2 years since that dinner. I don't talk to my mother anymore. Not because I'm punishing her, because I finally accepted that she wasn't going to change, and I couldn't make her see what she'd done by proving it. Proof doesn't heal a narcissist, it just makes them dig in harder. What I've learned is this: you can't expose someone into self-awareness. You can't manipulate someone into empathy. And you can't make people believe you if they've already chosen not to. But here's what actually saved me, and what I wish I'd known earlier. I stopped needing her to admit it. I stopped needing everyone else to validate my experience. Because the truth is, I know what happened. My body knows, my gut knows, and that's enough. My nervous system doesn't need a jury to confirm what it experienced. I started setting boundaries not to punish her, but to protect myself. I stopped going home for holidays. I stopped answering calls when I wasn't emotionally resourced. I didn't do it dramatically or angrily. I just quietly stepped back, and in that stepping back, I found peace. I also started therapy, real, deep work with someone who understood narcissistic family systems. I learned that my mother's behavior had nothing to do with my worth. It had everything to do with her own emptiness, her own need for validation, her own inability to let her daughter exist without competition. That realization didn't make it hurt less, but it made it make sense. If you're in a similar situation, if you're being gaslit, compared, invisible in your own family, I want you to know, you're not crazy. Your body's reaction is real, and you don't need to prove it to anyone, not your family, not your boyfriend, not even yourself. You just need to believe it, and then protect yourself accordingly. Your healing doesn't require their admission, it requires your own permission to walk away. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And in the comments, tell me, what boundary did you finally set that changed everything? I'd love to hear your story too.